Hi everybody and welcome to our talk on chapter 17 on animals. So this is kind of a long lecture, so I've broken it down into two different parts, animals part 1 and animals part 2, and that's going to cover two whole lectures. So normally in a normal classroom we would have met twice to actually cover this topic, but because we're doing it online I'm going to do two separate videos. One on animals 1 and one on animals 2 to kind of break it up. Otherwise it would be like a 3-hour video. And I'm not going to do that to you guys or to myself. So we're going to break this up and you guys are going to have two animal videos to make sure to not just watch animals 1 but to also watch animals 2 as well. So that will be in the second part of this video posted online. So let's go ahead and get started with chapter 17 on animals. My absolute favorite topic in biology. So we are going to have some fun here. And I have some really, really great videos for you guys. So I think you'll really enjoy. But first off, we have to actually figure out what an animal is. So we've described the qualities of being alive. Remember the 7 qualities we talked about being in the very, very first lecture. Things like evolution, things like reproduction, things like maintaining homeostasis. Now, all things that are alive do those 7 things, but they're not all things that are alive are not necessarily animals. We learned about funguses, which are not animals. We learned about plants, which are not animals. We learned about microbes and bacteria, which are not animals. So now we're actually getting into actual animals, and they do require 4 things to be considered an animal. Now, 3 things are listed up here, but the 4th one is that they are all eukaryotic. So all animals, meaning everything under the kingdom Animalia, is going to be eukaryotic. So let's go back to taxonomy for a second. We are in the domain eukarya, right? Not the domain prokarya or bacteria, same thing. Not the domain archaea. We are in the domain eukarya because we are all eukaryotic cells. So now we're in the kingdom Animalia. So domain eukarya, kingdom Animalia. This is different from the kingdom Plantae, which we already learned about, the kingdom Fungi, which we already learned about, or the domain, prokarya or bacteria. We've already learned about all those. So now we're really getting into the specifics of the domain of eukarya and the kingdom Animalia. So they are all eukaryotic, right? All animals are eukaryotic. All animals are multicellular. So you can't really have a single-celled animal. You can have a single-celled organism, absolutely, but it's not considered an actual animal. All animals must consume other animals to survive. So there is no animal out there that is capable of doing photosynthesis. Asterisk. Because there actually is, and we're going to talk about that one, but coming up. But all animals must eat to survive. So either you're a herbivore and you're eating plants, you're a carnivore and you're eating meat, or you're an omnivore and you're eating both, like humans, unless you're a vegetarian. So again, you have to consume your own nutrients to be able to survive. We are all heterotrophs. We must consume our outside nutrients, right? We don't make our own nutrients. We have to actually ingest them. And we get our nutrients from other organisms. Remember, plants are organisms. Funguses are organisms. Not just animals are organisms. You have to remember that. So we are eating other organisms, including plants, animals, sometimes funguses like mushrooms, etc. And last off, all animals move. And now you're thinking, wait a minute, I can probably name a couple animals that don't really move. And right, maybe not animals walk, but they all move at least at some point in their life. So the very first animal we're going to talk about, which actually was the very first animal on the planet, was not able to move. Except when they're in their juvenile larval stage. So in their developmental stages, they do move. Once they're adults, then they're sessile, they're stuck, right? Sessile just means stuck in place, kind of. So you can't move, right? We are not sessile, we are motile. We are able to move around. But all animals can move at least at some point in their life. So most animals are moving every day, but not all animals. At least not animals, all animals are moving in the way you think that they're moving. And we're going to talk all about that. So make sure that you guys can know those 4 things. Not the 7 things required to be alive. We already did that. I mean, you should remember that. But the 4 things required to be considered an animal. Okay, so if I ask you that question, don't tell me about reproduction. Bacteria reproduce, plants reproduce, funguses reproduce. Animals only do these 4 things. Okay, all right, so we're going to move on now. So here are the major groups of animals that we're going to be talking about. Now, this is all some ancestral, remember this is just our little cladogram, this is our little tree, our little phylogeny tree that we've separated out. So remember the ancestors here, and then we branch off and we break off into these different groups depending on the characteristics here in blue. So we came from some ancestral animal way back in the day. Again, it was probably some kind of bacteria floating around the ocean, which evolved and turned out to be the animals that we are that we know today. So the very first animal that you can see right here that's going to branch off and kind of be our out group right here, the one and only one that has no true tissues, are your sponges. Okay, so you can think of like your kitchen sponge, like a bath sponge. Those are actually modeled after real live sponges that lived in the ocean. So these guys do not have true tissues. They don't have bones. They don't have stuff like that. They're made of this like collagen kind of squishy material. Yes, the thing that gets injected into your lips. It's the same kind of collagen. In fact, all animals have this collagen. It's a very universal protein that we all share. But they do not actually have true tissues. So like if you were to poke us, like we're kind of squishy, right? Those are tissues. Sponges don't have that. So we're going to talk about more about sponges. We're going to see a whole video on sponges and you're going to be like, I had no idea sponges were so interesting, but they are, and they're fascinating. So the only one who does not have a true tissue is going to be your sponges. All of the rest of these animals have true tissues, meaning actual tissues like we do, like our epidermis, and all that kind of stuff. These are all just like tissue layers that go down and down and down. That's true tissues. Next up, okay, so now you can see right here, no true tissues for the sponges on this branch. Yes, all of them have these true tissues. If we were to continue around the next big branch, everybody comes down here and is bilateral. And we're going to talk about what that means in a second, except your Nigerians. Your Nigerians are radial. So again, you will need to know the differences between all of these groups. So starting out with the easiest one, sponges have no true tissue. Great, perfect. Nigerians have radial symmetry. Awesome. Like these are the things that are going to help you distinguish each and every single one of these groups. Yes, you will need to know and be able to identify for both your tests and your labs and stuff like that. So we have our Nigerians here. These are things like jellies and anemones and stony corals. And then finally you have everything else here, which is bilateral symmetry, including us. We're way down here in the chordates. But you have your mollusks, your flatworms, your annelids, your roundworms, your arthropods, your echinoderms, and finally your chordata. So these are all the groups that we're going to cover today. Again, this is kind of a long lecture, which is why I've broken it up into two. Because it does go on and on and on. So there's so many different animals out there, but really I think it's super important to not just care about this last group here, which is pretty much the only group that most people care about. These are things like your mammals and like your larger animals that you can see. They don't care so much about the rest of these animals, but they're super important. They create a diverse ecosystem and a diverse planet, and really they all keep each other kind of in balance, except for us. We're just like throwing everything off balance. But really you should care about all animals, not just the fluffy ones that you have in your house and you can cuddle. You know, yeah, there's a bunch of worms here that are kind of gross, but super important, and we're going to learn about why. So this is why we're going to spend 2 whole lectures talking about the diversity of animals and how awesome that is. All right, so let's talk about symmetry. I've already mentioned so far about bilateral and radial symmetry, and you're like, I don't know what that means. Okay, so we are what's called bilateral symmetry, meaning we have 2 sides. Right? Lateral means sides and bi means 2. So if you were to imaginarily draw a plane right down the middle of us, we have the same appendages on both sides. We're a mirror image. That is bilateral, 2 sides. Okay, if you are, and that's what you can see right here when it comes to this little lobster. This lobster is bilateral. You can only bisect him right down the middle to get a mirror image on both sides. You can kind of think of this as like a shovel. Right? Obviously, you can't cut it this way and it wouldn't be the same on both sides. You can only cut it right down the middle, just like us. When it comes to radial symmetry kind of means you can cut in any single direction, and no matter what, you're going to get that mirror image. So you can think of this as like a pot, like a circle. So if you were to cut that circle down the middle, it's still a circle on both sides. If you were to cut it this way, it's still circles on both sides. This way, same thing. You're always going to get that mirror image. So that's what radial means. So if you think of a jellyfish, they have that big round top and the tentacles hanging down, or an anemone, right? Like the stalk that comes up and is kind of round like a flower. That's what radial symmetry means, kind of radiating out from all points. Whereas bilateral, you can only cut us in one direction and to get that mirror image on both sides. Now we were talking externally, we're not talking internally. If you were to open us up, we are not the same on both sides. Most of the things are, but there are definitely distinct differences. Like you don't have 2 gallbladders on both sides of your body, that kind of thing. So we're not exactly internally bilateral, but externally, that's what we're talking about. So another really easy way to identify some of these phylums is to look at their symmetry. So I can tell you sponges, which is the first one we're going to look at, is called asymmetrical or non-symmetrical, meaning you can't cut them in any way, and they're just kind of like this. They're like this big wonky, like, blob. And you're like, all right, I can't cut that in any single direction to actually get a mirror image. So that would be asymmetrical. So there's 3 types of symmetry. You have asymmetrical, which is no symmetry. You have bilateral, which is, okay, if you have one plane right down the middle, then you have mirror images, but you can only cut it one way. And then you have radial symmetry, meaning it's like a circle and you can cut it in any single way and you're always going to get that mirror image. So things like sponges are asymmetrical. Things like Nigerians are radially symmetrical. So all you have to do is look at the organism and be like, can I cut it in any single... Yep, okay, it's got to be radial symmetrical. And then there's us. And pretty much most of the organisms that you can think of are going to be bilateral. So that's not really a great way to distinguish because so many of these different phylums are going to be bilateral. It's like, I don't know which one it is, but we're going to talk about that. All right, so let's get to our first animal. Speaking of that asymmetrical, no true tissued animal, this is the sponges. And sponges are actually really, really fascinating and believed to be the first animal on the planet. And again, we don't know this for a fact because there's nobody around with a video camera or an iPhone taking pictures. But just structurally and evolutionarily wise, and when you look at those trees, you're like, well, this is the only one who doesn't have tissues. He's the only one who doesn't move. He must have been the first. And so that's what we really believe. That is our theory on these little sponges. They do not have any true tissues. They do not have organs. They don't have eyes. They don't have brains. They don't have blood. They don't have anything. So you think of most animals having all those things. Sponges are the first of the animal, the original animal, and therefore the simplest. They didn't evolve to have all those things because they came first. So they're simple and they're kind of weird looking and functionally a little, but it works out great for them and they survive really, really well and are super, super important for our oceans. So we do really need to take care of our sponges. Even though they don't look like animals, even though they're not out chasing the ball around in the yard, they are still animals and very, very important. So these guys are, remember, sessile. That word sessile means stuck or is stationary. Like think of a cactus, right? The cactus isn't going anywhere, right? That's kind of like a sponge, like a sea cactus, right? Kind of looks like a plant, but it's not. And we're going to learn in the video why it's not. And actually, you definitely watch these videos. They're all from what's called, The Shape of Life. So if you ever just go to theshapeoflife.com or .org, it'll give you all of these amazing videos. And I'm going to show you guys a bunch of them, but he has so many more and they're really, really well done. So if you want to go learn about, you have all this time at home, right? If you're not going into work, make sure that you guys watch these videos. Oh, they're really just incredible. So these guys are, remember, sessile. They are stuck, but they are motile as juveniles. So when they reproduce, they release their sperm and their eggs. They're going to form these little larvae. The larvae are going to float around, kind of swim around until they settle somewhere. And when they settle somewhere, then they're actually going to start to grow, and then they're going to be stuck in place like this. Not like exactly like this, but they're still going to be stuck or sessile for the rest of their life. So that's what that means. We're going to watch a whole video on how they feed, which is actually really, really cool because even though they don't look like they're alive or even moving at all, they really are. And all their cells are talking to each other and performing these really amazing functions. So I'm not going to bother telling you guys about it. I'm going to show you guys about it because it really is just one of my favorites. So I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so that was The Shape of Life on sponges. I hope you guys really enjoyed that. I mean, when I first saw that green dye shooting out of the sponge, I was like, oh my god, that is so cool. So hopefully you guys really enjoyed that as well. And again, you can always rewatch this video or you can just go on theshapeoflife.org and watch all the rest of their videos because they are really just fascinatingly cool. All right, so what we learned about these choanocytes, also called these collar cells. And again, they're flapping their little flagella. They're creating this water current that's sucking the water through their bodies, through their insides. They're pulling out that food and then they're releasing the water outwards. That is known as filter feeding. So they're sucking in water. They're filtering out the organics, the food, the nutrient parts, and then they're releasing the rest of that water outwards. So that's filter feeding, and these sponges are really, really, really good at it. Because, they don't get a lot of food from that. Like the video said, you drank 1,000 gallons to get 1 ounce of food. 1 ounce of food is like a bite, like a single bite. That's a lot of filtering to just get a little bit of food, but that's how these sponges do, and they're really, really incredible with it. So again, they're going to be inside here. They're not inside the tissues. They're just essentially part of the cells, and it's really just fascinating. So if you guys want to learn more about sponges, you absolutely can. All right, moving on to our next phylum. These are the Nigerians. These are going to be your jellies, your your anemones, and your corals. So coral reefs, which I'm sure most of you guys have heard about, possibly even been to. They're all struggling right now because of things like climate change and bleaching. It's really, really horrific. I teach this in my marine biology class in great detail. But these are all part of the Nigerian group. So the Nigerian group is fascinating because they do have true tissues, but they're one of the only ones that actually have radial symmetry. So as soon as you look at these guys, you can see round. And again, not so much from the side. So if I were to cut this way from the side, it wouldn't be radial. But you're talking about from the top down. So it is kind of tricky sometimes when you're looking at these guys to determine the symmetry. So you almost have to move the organism around and kind of orient them correctly. So if we were to look down at the anemone this way, it wouldn't look radial, but if we look directly down on the top of the anemone, we can actually see that it is a perfect circle, and therefore any which way we cut it is going to show that mirror image on either side, that radial symmetry that we've been talking about. So I know it's kind of tricky, but just remember, Nigerians, radial. These guys are really cool because they have stinging cells. They have like tentacles and these like barbs that shoot out of these cells and pierce you and inject this venom. It's crazy. And they battle each other. And it really is just, we are so glad that these guys can't eat us because there's so many things in the animal kingdom that we would just have no defenses against. We just happen to be smarter and have better technology to stay away from these things because, whoa, we would just die 1,000 times over for some of these animals, including some of these Nigerians. I mean, they have these like poisonous little barbs that are triggered and then they battle each other to have territory. It's fascinating. So these guys are really, really cool. We're going to learn about some of their stinging cells in just a second when we get to this video. So we are going to see one more time the shape of life coming to Nigerians. Oh, and these are also the first animals that were able to move. So we learned about the sponges, the first animal, but now we're going to learn about Nigerians, the first animals who can actually move. And you can thank your Nigerians because we would not be able to be here today if it wasn't for said Nigerians. So I'm going to show you guys the shape of life Nigerians right now. It's just another fantastic video from The Shape of Life. They're really so great and such a great resource to really get into and view these animals in such a way with their amazing animation. So it really is super helpful. Like I said, always go back and rewatch these videos or go to theshapeoflife.org. It's really some great stuff. So this is kind of an up close of what we saw in the video, these stinging cells, these cnidocytes, a nematocyst. So essentially what they are in here is they have this like stinging cell inside their cnidocyte, which is here. As soon as it's triggered, they basically shoot it out like the harpoon, like we saw in the video, and they're gonna inject it into their prey. They're gonna release the venom or toxins or whatever that they have. And it really is just super painful. And these barbs themselves are serrated like a knife, so they're jagged and just horrific. So, again, all along these tentacles are all going to be these little cnidocytes triggered with these little nematocysts. And again, they're just going to be able to shoot out at you. Now, if you've ever been to a tide pool and you're like, wait a minute, an anemone can sting you that bad? I mean, you guys have all heard the jellyfish can sting you. But you're like, that anemone? What's it going to do if it stings me? I've touched them before. And that's usually because our skin has so many layers and our skin is so thick that they can't pierce us. So yeah, they are actually still trying to stab you with these little things, but they're not actually able to get through our rough skin. So like I said before, thank goodness that we can't actually be, hurt really badly by these. Now, there are some species that we can get hurt by, and these are pretty crazy. This is one of them. This is the Portuguese Man of War. Now, this is actually a colonial Nigerian, which is kind of weird. So a colonial Nigerian means that it's a colony of lots of little tiny organisms living together as one. So it's not actually one individual, it's actually thousands of individuals, but they're forming this one singular body to form like almost an individual organism. It's crazy. This right here is a modified bell, so you can think of like a jelly, right? But this top of the bell right here has actually been modified into a gas bladder. So these guys float on the top of the surface of the water, getting carried by the wind. So the wind pushes this little bell around and it drags them along. Therefore, they're able to get access to more food. Now, the only problem with this is you have no idea how long these tentacles can be. They can be 20, 30 feet long sometimes, and they can be really, really fine. So you wouldn't necessarily see them in the water. So it's kind of rule of thumb, if you're ever swimming and you see one of these bells, you just take off in the opposite direction because you have no idea how long these tentacles are actually spread out into the ocean. And that still can sting you no matter how far away they are. I mean, obviously they still have to touch you and still have to trigger those little nematocysts, but still, these guys can do some serious damage on you. And this is what we can see right here. This guy is one of the most deadly things in the entire world, actually. And he's like the size of a dime. And you're like, what? Seriously? That can't hurt me? Yes, it can. This is the box jellyfish. This guy can totally mess you up. I have a video right here. I'm not going to show it to you guys because we have so many other videos to watch this time. But click on any of these extra links of these videos. They're really, really fascinating, and it kind of show you these insights into this. So this little tiny guy right here, little tiny guy right there, can actually do some serious damage because of the strength of his venom and the nematocysts that he has. So just crazy that you guys have to watch out for some of these little guys. All right, let's get on to the flatworms. The flatworms is Platyhelminthes, the phylum Platyhelminthes, and these guys are kind of crazy. So these are believed to be some of the first predators out there. So not just, yeah, can I move, but like not just the first predators, the first hunters. So they're actively going out there searching for prey. When you're talking about the jellyfish and the anemones, they're kind of just hanging out waiting for food to come to them. I mean, sometimes, don't get me wrong, those jellyfish and those anemones can actually grab and eat and kill fish and stuff like that. If they're large enough, absolutely. But these little flatworms right here, these guys are kind of the really, really like aggressively predatory ones. Like, I'm seeking out my prey and I'm going to eat you. Kind of aggressive. So these guys are really, really cool. So we're going to talk all about them. Now, what you're seeing here, this is actually the mouth. So this is kind of the head region and the mouth region of a tapeworm from the inside intestines of a mammal. Yeah. So unfortunately, not only are these guys really amazing predators, some of them are really amazing parasites. And so they stick with us for a long periods of time, using us as hosts to get what they want. And again, you are so lucky that you guys live in a nice, clean environment, in a clean country where we have fresh water that doesn't contain some of these guys, because woo, we're going to see some gross things from some of these worms coming up. And again, you're going to be very, very glad that you don't have to deal with that. But before we do, I have another video for you guys. I know, weird. Shape of life, here we go on Platyhelminthes, the flatworms. Once again, I hope you find all of these videos super interesting and super fascinating, because they're full of tons of facts and this amazing footage that, you know, we would never be able to see here in the classroom. So, especially when it comes to the animals, you can't really talk about animals without showing real animals and real animal behaviors. So that's why this video is going to be a little video heavy, because there's just so much fascinating things that you have to see with your own eyes to actually get from some of these animals. So that was flatworms. Thank you, Shape of Life. Now remember, they are some free living and some parasitic. This is an example of a parasitic one. This is actually inside, I believe, a whale. So this is a tapeworm inside the intestines of a whale. You can imagine, if this is how long the intestines are, how long that worm is. And yes, that is a ruler right there. So I believe the longest, I don't actually, you know what, I'm totally guessing. I couldn't even imagine the longest one, but it's something like 40 feet, 70 feet. I don't know. You're talking about stories of worm living inside of your stomach. Like, no, thank you. Yeah, really ridiculously gross. And again, they love mammals. They love mammals. So again, thank God we have such great water here and we don't have to drink any of the disgusting infected waters, because that's what would happen and grow inside of you, and it would not come out until it actually, you would have to remove it or like poison it or take all this medicine to get, no, don't do it. Nasty stuff. This is not so nasty. This is a little Planaria. Sometimes you guys can actually do labs on Planarias. In fact, when I was in college, I did a lab on the Planaria, and the Planaria has really amazing regenerative properties. So essentially what we did, which was totally messed up and horrifically barbaric, and I thought so then, we like chopped up these Planaria, and then they would grow. So no matter how many times you chopped them up, they would grow into new Planaria. So I think our group did like a 1, 2, 3. We grew 3 Planarias. One group split them right down the middle, 2 Planarias. And then one other group split them about to here, and then it was a 2-headed Planaria. Oh, it was crazy. But these guys are not harmful, not like the tapeworms. These guys are free living. They're basically just going around in soils and stuff like that. And water supplies and stuff like that. But not to worry. So not all of these guys are like horrifically scary that you actually need to worry about. This little cute guy, and you can see his little eye spots right here. He almost looks like cross-eyed, right? You can't be afraid of something that's cross-eyed. So that is Planaria. All right, let's talk about the mollusk, or the phylum Mollusca. Mollusca is one of the largest phylums, and it is extremely diverse. It has everything from snails to clams to octopuses. And yes, it is octopuses, not octopi, because it is not Greek-based, it is Latin-based, and therefore octopuses is correct and octopi is incorrect. However, nobody really likes to say octopuses, so everybody says octopi. I know, but haha! It's incorrect. Anyway, so the mollusks, so typically these are your soft-bodied shelled organisms. We're going to learn about other soft-bodied shelled organisms that actually have an exoskeleton different than a shell. A shell and an exoskeleton are 2 different things. A shell is actually produced by what's called a shell gland in the mantle. Now, mantle is just, you can think of like this, the fleshy skin part, like the, almost the internal organ part, not quite, but kind of think of like that. And that's what's actually secreting these shells. So all of these guys have some kind of shell, even if it's internal. Now, sometimes those shells can be modified or reduced or completely lost. But most of these guys, you think of, most of the mollusks have some kind of shell. Like the clams, right? Those are bivalves. Those have 2 shells and connected at a valve. You have the snails. You have things like slugs. All of those are going to be, again, under your mollusca. These guys are pretty awesome. They have what's called a radula. Now, a radula is essentially a rasping tongue. So think about a cat's tongue. You know how it has all those little kind of like spikes and bumps for the licking, right? Think about that, but like really crazy spiked and super hard. And that's because a lot of these guys actually spend their days licking rocks to get food. Yup. Hey, whatever works for you, right? So things like limpets and snails and some of these other guys, they're going to basically crawl along their bellies and they're going to be licking algae off the rocks. So if you spend your entire day licking something that's really hard to get your food source, you can't have any bit of your radula break off. And if it does, you might not be able to feed yourself. So they actually have one of the hardest materials in the entire world is their radula, is their little essential tongue. Now, not all of these guys have a radula. Sometimes a radula is modified. When it comes to these octopuses, yes, they have a radula, but it's actually modified into a beak. And it's called a beak because it looks just like the beak of a bird, which is really weird. So if you think about the whole, like the biting the beak, yeah, that's exactly what they have. So their radula is modified for more of the tearing and the biting instead of the licking of the rocks. But still really, really crazy, amazing organisms. So yeah, I know, you guessed it. Another Shape of Life video. Aren't you so excited? I know you are. But trust me, honestly, these are really, once you watch each and every one of these, you realize how different the phylums are, and it's only going to help you guys on your test. I know it takes some time, but, you know, watch them at your own pace, and then rewatch them if you have to while you guys are studying, but it really will help solidify the differences between them. So without further ado, another Shape of Life video. I really hope you guys enjoyed all of these videos I have for you. Like I said, they really, really do help, so. All right, so here's an up-close look at said Rattula that we were just talking about. Remember, this is one of the hardest structures in the entire world, and it's this natural phenomenon that just happens to look like these crazy little spikes that are found right here. So these are limpets. These are one of those organisms that I told you were basically crawling on their bellies all day, licking rocks. And that's why their Rattula has to be so strong. Because if you're basically scraping what's called microalgae off of these rocks, and some of these kind of break off because they get damaged, you won't be able to feed yourself, and essentially you're going to die and starve to death. So it's really important that organisms like this feed with their Rattulas, and their Rattulas actually don't get broken. So one of the hardest materials absolutely in the entire world. Yeah, like diamond hard, like even harder than that. Could probably scratch diamonds, actually. I wonder if anyone's ever tried that. New experiment. So really, really important for these guys. And again, all of them have a Rattula, but sometimes they're modified. So, like the octopuses have a modified Rattula, and those are called a beak. Here's some more videos for you guys. I'm going to show you a conch going after a prey. Now, I do say conch. It is spelled C-O-N-C-H, and this is one of my probably biggest pet peeves, like, ever, is the pronunciation of the word conch. Now, I keep saying conch because CH does make a k sound in the English language. However, typically when it's written, people read it as conch, which is incorrect. I've even argued this with English teachers, and they're wrong. If you look in a dictionary, yes, both technical pronunciations are there, but it's probably only because so many people pronounce it wrong. I'm going to teach you the right way, especially because marine biology is my jam. It is conch, not conch. That literally, the conch word, just like the hairs in the back of my neck just stick up and go, just an all angry face. Yeah, what really happened is there's a few places in the entire world that conchs grow. And the Florida Keys is one of them in the tropics. And so anyone in the Florida Keys knows that it's pronounced conch because it's a local delicacy and it's a local species. Well, what happened is when you write things down and then it gets shipped to wherever, people read it phonetically and it became conch, which is terribly, terribly incorrect. Even the video that we're going to look at, they pronounce it conch and it's wrong. I don't even know how to... I don't even know another example of this, but it drives me absolutely crazy. So it is conch, and if you go anywhere in the world where these conchs are actually found, nobody says conch. The only people who say conch don't live anywhere near where conchs actually live and where they're actually found. So you, my wonderful class, will forever know it as conch, despite the fact that everybody says conch. Anyway, so I'm going to show you guys this video right now just on the sole purpose that I want you to know what a conch is. A conch shell is like those big, really beautiful seashells that people put up to their ears and they hear the ocean. That's a conch shell. And essentially, they are mollusks, and they're essentially like a big snail, right? It's a sea snail that crawls along its belly, and it's got these cute little eyes and stuff. And I have a lot of video of actually seeing these in the Keys in person, and they're just, oh, they're so cute, but terribly predatory as well. So we're going to see that right now. I hope you guys enjoy the conch video. Yeah, I can't watch that video without hearing the word conch like 47 times, and I go, oh my god! But again, you can say it however you'd like to, but if you'd like to say it correct, just like octopuses, this is one thing that I'm here to teach you guys. It's the correct way to say things and reference things, and conch is one of them with a K. I mean, spelled with a CH, but pronounced with a K. Alright, like my name is Stephanie, but it's, you know, PH because it makes the F sound. It's not an F because that's just a terrible way of spelling Stephanie, unless that's your name, sorry. Okay, moving on. Oh, it's just a long video. This is a long lecture today. Alright, let's talk about more worms. And you're like, wait a minute, we already covered worms. Yes, we covered flatworms. We did not cover annelid worms. And annelid worms are segmented worms. And you're like, what's a segment? Essentially, you can think of an earthworm, how they have those little lines going across their body. Each one of those little lines is a segment. So when you look at them, they are segmented. Makes sense. So all you have to do is look at the worm and say, does it have little segments? Oh, then it has to be segmented worm and annelid. So we can see right here, these are some leeches. This is an actual earthworm. Notice how they all have these little lines, these little striations right here. And again, each one of those is a tiny little segment, so that's why they're considered our segmented worm. This right here is known as a polychaete worm. This is specifically a Christmas tree worm. These are marine worms that don't even look like worms. They look like little tiny flowers or trees and stuff when you're swimming, except as soon as you swim by them, they all like tuck back into their little encasing, which is pretty cool. So you're like, oh, that was an animal, even though it kind of looks like a flower. So yeah, these guys are pretty interesting. We're going to see a video on these pretty capable worms right here. I know, you're like, what? More worm videos? Yes, more worm videos. It's really just, like I said, we can talk about these all you want, but it really, you got to see them in person. Now, some of these guys are free living, like the earthworm and the Christmas tree worm. Some of them are parasitic, like the leeches. Leeches do have two suckers, by the way. They have their suckers near their mouth and the suckers near their tail. Both are used to kind of stabilize. So this one's used for the feeding, this one's used for the stabilizing, because if your tail is just flopping off, and most likely your mouse is not going to be able to support your weight. Hence, two suckers, posterior and anterior. But really easy to identify as long as you know that they are the segmented worms. All right, so real quick, here's another video. So these are just some of these giant worms that we know about. Another whole group of giant these annelid worms are down at the deep sea hydrothermal vents. So they have these like 6-foot worms, like 4 to 6 foot worms with bodies like this big around. They're absolutely massive. So once again, I'm so glad that we're large and we don't have to deal with these crazy things potentially trying to eat us. Yeah, and most of them, again, like unless you're a leech, you're going to be, you know, one of those parasitic ones that are actually feeding off the blood of another organism, or you're going to be one of the free-living worms. Like the earthworm is just eating, essentially they're eating dirt and they're removing those nutrients, so that's known as deposit feeding. They're eating the deposits in the soil and then releasing out the soil. Some of your polychaete worms are just your free-living, so there's scavengers and stuff like that. Even those tube worms, essentially they're just suspension feeders. They're waiting for things to float by in the ocean, and then they kind of grab them with their little plume and then pull them back towards their mouth. So not all of these worms you have to worry about, but some of them you do, and some of them are crazy. All right, so we're going to be talking about the last phylum for this lecture. These are going to be your arthropods. I think it's the last phylum for this lecture, and then we're going to be doing animals part 2. These are your arthropods, so the phylum Arthropoda. Now, arthropods are the other soft-body organisms that have a shell, but their shell is not a true shell because it's not secreted by a shell gland. Their shell is actually an exoskeleton. So our skeleton is our, structural support system, but an exoskeleton means on the outside. So we have an endoskeleton. Our skeleton is on the inside of us. They have an exoskeleton. Their skeleton is on the outside of them. So they have a very hard exoskeleton. It's made out of chitin. This is a type of carbohydrate. If you guys remember way back to macromolecules in chapter 4, chitin is a type of carbohydrate. It's basically a complex carb. So it's a string of long starches connected to each other to make this kind of like big, fibrous, thick, hard material. So really crucial for these guys for survival, because sometimes it's their only defensive mechanism is to have this hard shell so that nothing can actually get into them. Now, it doesn't work for all of them, but they have modifications to deal with that. They have fangs, they have poison, they have stingers, they make webs, they have all sorts of crazy evolutionarily derived adaptations to kind of help them survive and really thrive. In fact, Arthropoda is like the #1 phylum in the world, and that's because it has insects. Right? Not only crustaceans like your crabs, your shrimps, your lobsters, your copepods, your isopods, all your sorts of marine animals, but it has all of your insects as well. So that is a huge, huge, huge phylum, and you can find it in just about every single ecosystem in the earth, the Arctic. Well, there's not much that can live in the Arctic, but almost every single corner of the planet, because it's such a diverse group. It's such a huge phylum. So the phylum Arthropoda is just massive, and they do really, really well for themselves. So we're going to learn about a couple different groups, including insects, which are your insects, arachnids, which are your spiders, You've got your crustaceans, which would be like your crabs, your shrimps, your lobsters. And then you've got your centipedes and your millipedes. So big, diverse group. Big, diverse group. But all have that exoskeleton. Oh, they also have jointed appendages. So, like, this is a jointed appendage, right? I'm moving my appendage, my arm, via this joint right here. So I can move like this. Crabs can move like this too. This is different than some of the other kind of motion we've seen so far. So these jointed appendages and this exoskeleton actually allows them to do a lot of really amazing things for them. So, yep, you guessed it. We're going to do a video, but not just yet. Not just yet. All right, so let's look at these different groups of arthropods before we actually get to our videos. So we have insects, things like ants. We have centipedes and millipedes. We have our arachnids, which are our spiders, and our crustaceans, which again, shrimps, crabs, and lobsters. Do you need to know every single difference between these groups? No. Do you need to know that they're all they're all arthropods? Absolutely. Could you maybe need to know an example of maybe each one of these groups? Sure, why not, right? That's not super hard. But again, we're looking for the bigger picture here. We're looking for just their group as a whole. What makes all of these guys similar and under the phylum Arthropoda? And again, that would be the exoskeleton, the jointed appendages, and what's called an open circulatory system. Now, for humans, we have a closed circulatory system, meaning our circulating fluid, which is blood, is confined in veins and arteries. Those are called vessels. So they're transporting things like a ship, like a vessel, all over our body. Now, these guys have an open circulatory system, meaning there is nothing confined in a vessel. They also don't have blood. They have what's called hemosyl. Now, this is a lot of information. Do you need to know all of it? No. I'm just giving you guys background information. But open circulatory system is slightly different. They do not have blood. They have what's called hemosyl. And it's essentially this like clear bluish green liquid that like floats around inside of them, bathing all of their organs in this circulating fluid, so they can do things like diffusion of oxygen and nutrients and stuff like that. Which is why if you step on an insect, it doesn't bleed, right? Unless it's a mosquito or something that maybe just ate your blood. You crush that spider, it doesn't ooze out blood, it oozes out kind of this like clear goo. That's hemosyl, right? That's because they have a different circulating fluid than us. We have blood, hemoglobin, they have hemosyl, slightly different. Here's a really cool one. Speaking of blood, this is a horseshoe crab. These guys are really awesome. They're part of the Meristomata group. And these are one of the first ancestral arthropods. So these guys have been around for a really, really long time. They're not super good at what they do, but they're super good at surviving, and that's what's important. So you can see right here, they have this protective shell on the outside, this exoskeleton. Their legs are going to be found on the inside, on the underneath side, and then the little mouth is right here. They do have gills. They are a marine organism, but they do come up on land to mate. So you can see them up here on shore kind of mating with each other. Now these guys are really unique because they have not quite hemosyl like an insect would, but they actually have it modified into this like blue blood. Now, of course, any human that sees some animal is slightly different. Oh, it must have healing properties that are going to save us and make us immortal. Yeah. So what do? We torture these and we harvest them for their blue blood. So these are all living horseshoe crabs, which are actually being drained alive for that blue blood because it supposedly has miraculous healing properties. Like shark fin soup. Yeah, it absolutely does nothing. Zero evidence of it ever helping absolutely anything. And so these poor animals are tortured and killed all the time because they're just slightly different. And that really sucks, but humans are the worst. God, we're just so terrible. Anyway, blue blood, horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs themselves, though, are really, really cool. Look it up. My not so favorite group, that would be the arachnids. I will swim with great white sharks outside of the cage, but as soon as you put a spider in the same room with me, you're going to see a Stephanie-shaped hole running out of the room. So I shouldn't have to describe spiders too much for you guys. They build webs. They're really gross and creepy looking. I know. But they're good. They're predators. They kill bugs. They're really good for the environment, which is why I try not to kill them. I try. Here's a couple of ones that we have in California that you might need to concern yourself with. This is a black widow. And yes, it is called a black widow because she does kill her husband. When they're mating, after they're done mating, she bites his head off and eats it. No, that's a grasshopper. But she does kill him. One of the many that actually kills females that kills their male counterparts after mating. And you think, oh, this black one with the red hourglass tummy, that's the really one you have to worry about. And that's actually not the one you got to worry about. This guy right here is a brown recluse. That's the one you have to worry about. Slightly smaller, slightly sneakier, a little bit flatter. Definitely not as noticeable as that big red belly for the black widow. But essentially their venom melts your tissues. And remember, we're made up of tissues. So it kills your cells and then causes the other cells around those cells to die. And essentially your skin just starts like melting away, like whole, starts like burning. And we're not just talking like a day, a couple hours. We're talking for weeks. Your skin will continue to melt away to the point where sometimes they have to actually do a skin graft and cut skin off somewhere else on your body just to stop it. Oh, and it's horrifically crazy. Yeah, you do not want to get bit by a brown recluse spider. And they are here in Southern California. They're everywhere. Yeah, there's a reason I'm terrified of these things. He's probably not going to hurt you. Pass. No. This is called a camel spider. It is as big as that guy's leg. Yeah, it is. It is as. It's no. Just so many no's. Just no. There's also the huntsman spiders in Australia, like the size of my hand of a spider. Sorry, I digress. But and again, usually the larger the spiders are, the least harmful that they're not going to hurt you. In fact, I heard that daddy longlegs have one of the strongest venoms in the world, but they're so tiny that their fangs can't even pierce our skin and wouldn't even be able to deliver said venom. So it's not, it's not always the big ones you have to worry about, like tarantulas. They're not going to hurt you. Huntsman spiders, they're not going to hurt you. They might hurt a bird. Yeah, or something crazy like that. Whoa. Yeah. All right. Moving on. Scorpions. Scorpions are a fun one, right? They have those modified little tails for the, right? That's used for predator avoidance. And also, I believe that's how they catch some of their food. This is a little fun one. He's actually carrying a bunch of babies around on his back. That is not something that I would want to run into. And like many organisms, the babies sometimes can be more fatal than the adults because the babies don't really have any kind of defensive mechanism except their venom. So sometimes the venom of the smaller ones are the ones you have to worry about. Remember, there are differences between poison and venom. Poison you actually have to eat. Venom is the one that injects you. So like the Nigerians, they have the venom. You can call them all toxins if you want to. Poisons, toxins. But typically poisonous is if you eat it, you get sick. Venomous is if they sting you, then you get sick. Infected? Poisoned. That's misleading and confusing. All right. Ticks. Ticks and mites. These are super fun. You've probably had to pull them off your dog if you've had them. If you have a dog. What you probably don't want to do is you don't want to get them yourself because they cause really nasty things like Lyme disease. So this western black-legged tick is actually found here in California. Not super common, but definitely here. And they cause things like Lyme disease. So you can actually see this Lyme disease spreading right here. Excuse me. And this is somebody's back. This is going all over his skin. And no, this is not fun and very, very painful. So not a good thing. You want to stay away from those ticks and stuff. This is why you usually want to keep your legs covered when you're going hiking, because they're basically just waiting on some of these plants for a mammal to walk by so that they can actually do this to you. So bad news. Bad news. Centipedes and millipedes. So let's start off with the millipedes, and yes, they are different. Millipedes have 2 walking legs for every segment. So remember, the segment is the little sections going all the way down their body. These have 2 legs for every single segment, unlike the centipede that only has the 1 leg for each segment. These guys can be venomous, poisonous, venomous. Again, make sure to make the distinction. But typically, most of the time, they're found eating like dead or decaying leaves and plant matter and stuff like that. So probably don't have to worry about them. And again, any kind of venom that they have is probably a predator defense mechanism and not actually how they're eating. Except if you're the centipede, you actually have little poisonous claws with this little poison gland at the end of it. So they have 1 walking leg for each one of those segments. And these guys, maybe I will show you guys this video. I wasn't going to show you this one video, but I will show you guys this video. This is a bat-eating centipede. A bat-eating centipede. You know how big a bat is? You can flying with the bat. Yeah. Centipede grabs him, bites him, injects the poison or the venom, and boom, you're just done. Yeah. So once again, guys, be so thankful that we do not get eaten by these things. Ooh. All right. Here's a creepy video. All right, well, that was, again, another really fun video to watch and make you really happy to be sitting at home on your couch and not in the crazy, crazy wilderness where things are trying to eat you. All right, so guys, with that, I'm going to give you the end of Animal Lecture Part 1. So remember, Animal Lecture Part 2 is going to be the second video. Yes, they're both covering Chapter 17. There's a lot of information in these. There's a lot of videos in these, guys. Please do not skip the video clips. They're really super helpful and handy. And yeah, sometimes I do put questions from them on your exam. So make sure you watch them in their entirety. And otherwise, I will see you guys for Animals Part 2 in just a little bit. So enjoy and have a wonderful day. Stay safe and have a great day.